What is up, HOA Army? Welcome back to the channel. I've got a story for you today that is so wild, so audacious, and so deliciously petty that it almost feels illegal. This isn't just about a wrong color fence or a lawn that's 2 inches too tall. This is a story about 47 acres, 96 luxury homes, and one old deed that could make an entire homeowners association vanish. Today we're diving into the saga of John, a guy who didn't want to fight but who was given a multi-million-dollar war right on his doorstep. The quiet man and the Colorado dirt. So meet John. John isn't some high-powered real estate investor or a corporate lawyer. He's a historian. He spends his days elbow-deep in dusty archives, ancient maps, and musty county records. He loves quiet. He loves facts. And he definitely loves anything that can be proven with a piece of paper. John's life changed, like so many great stories do, with a thick official envelope. His distant great-aunt, a woman named Alara who lived like a hermit on the edge of the Rockies, had passed away. John was her only living relative, and she left him everything: a small, ramshackle cabin, a mountain of cryptic books, and 47 acres of prime Colorado land. When he drove out to see the property for the first time, he expected mountains, meadows, and maybe a bear. He found the meadow, all right. But it was being systematically chewed up by bulldozers. The wall of concrete and the grand vision, we're not talking about a little shed. We're talking massive, multi-million-dollar luxury homes. They were building a fortress, a high-end subdivision called the Grand Peaks Preserve. John parked his beaten-up Subaru and just stared. The site was huge. Giant cranes, massive yellow machines, and a steady stream of construction trucks were pouring concrete and raising walls. The whole thing smelled of fresh lumber and ambition. And right there, centered on the main entrance, was a huge, glossy sign: "Welcome to the Grand Peaks Preserve, developed by Elevation Group. Managed by Ms. Thorne and the HOA board. 96 exclusive homes." John felt his jaw drop. He pulled out the survey map his lawyer had given him, a recent, updated one tied to Alara's will, and walked the property lines. He found the old, rusted iron marker still deep in the dirt, exactly where the deed said it should be. And the terrible, sickening truth became clear. The entire Grand Peaks Preserve development, all 96 lots, the main clubhouse, the private roads, the pool, the gates, was being built on his land. The property lines had been ignored, misplaced, and John had a horrible feeling about this, intentionally redrawn. The quiet man finds his trump card now. Most people, most of us, if we're honest, would lose our minds. We'd call the police, hire 20 lawyers, and stand in front of a bulldozer with a protest sign. But John is a historian, and historians are patient. He went back to the old cabin, avoiding the construction site like the plague. For 3 weeks, he lived off canned beans and spent every waking hour in Alara's study, which was packed wall-to-wall with books, ledgers, and maps that smelled like cedar and thyme. He wasn't looking for a current survey. He was looking for history. He needed the original proof. And then he found it. Tucked away on a high shelf, inside a thick, leather-bound accounting ledger from 1932, was the original hand-drawn deed. It wasn't just a copy. It was the original grant of land, signed, sealed, and recorded with an archaic, unmistakable county stamp that predated the entire modern subdivision boom. It was ironclad, it was beautiful, and it proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that he owned every square inch of the land currently hosting a $50 million building project. But that's where things got really strange. Instead of marching down to the site and waving the document like a flag of war, John sat back in his cabin. He watched the trucks move and the foundations rise. He watched the HOA sink millions of dollars into his dirt. He realized his opponent wouldn't be a developer. It would be Ms. Thorne, the HOA president, and she was about to make the biggest mistake of her career. John decided he wouldn't stop them. He would let them finish. He would wait for the moment of maximum financial pain. He was playing a long game, a very, very expensive game, but the waiting game wouldn't last forever. Soon the HOA was going to notice a solitary figure watching them from the perimeter, and the quiet war would turn into open conflict. All right, so picture this. John has his ancient yellow deed, the physical evidence that makes him the rightful owner of every single square foot of dirt that $50 million worth of construction is sitting on. The roofs are going up. They're paving the roads. In a few weeks, people are going to start moving their furniture in. The time for waiting, for silent observation, was done. John knew he had to strike, and he had to strike hard. The historian's move. John isn't a lawyer, but he knows research. He spent 2 days meticulously compiling a package. It wasn't just the 1932 deed. He included modern satellite imagery, geological surveys, and a sworn affidavit from a land surveyor he hired, who nearly had a stroke when he saw the property lines, confirming the HOA's enormous blunder. He didn't send a cute email. He sent a nuclear legal package via certified mail, addressed personally to the two people who mattered most: Ms. Thorne, the HOA president, and the CEO of the Elevation Group developer. The letter was clinical, calm, and utterly devastating. It contained a simple message: cease and desist all construction immediately. You are currently trespassing on privately owned land. Your construction, sales, and agreements are null and void. You have 72 hours to acknowledge this error and contact my attorney, or I will file for an emergency injunction and permanent forfeiture of all improvements. It was John's opening move, and it was a checkmate before the game even started. The cornered president, Ms. Thorne. She was the absolute queen of this community, a corporate shark in a tastefully tailored suit. She didn't just manage the HOA, she was the HOA. She drove a brand new Mercedes, lived in the most expensive model home, and ran the whole operation with an iron fist, fining residents for dandelions and enforcing rules that felt like personal vendettas. When the thick legal envelope arrived on her desk, she barely glanced at it. She assumed it was some crazy neighbor complaining about the color of the paint or a construction noise fine. She tossed it onto the massive pile of handle later paperwork. But the next morning, the official county sheriff's deputy showed up at the site with the court-ordered cease and desist. The construction site ground to a stop. The bulldozers went silent. The cement mixers froze mid-pour. That's when Ms. Thorne finally read John's letter, and that's when she went from annoyed to absolute terrifying fury. The moment she cross-referenced John's deed with her own heavily flawed property documents, she realized the extent of the disaster. It wasn't a mistake. It was a crisis. $50 million in construction, contracts, and future sales, all sitting on land she didn't own. But that's where things got really strange. The dirty lawyer and the secret handshake Ms. Thorne was many things, but stupid wasn't one of them. She knew the original surveyor her company had used, a shady guy named Dennis, was crooked. She had paid him a large bonus to get creative with the property lines and ensure the development wrapped neatly around a nearby public creek for a nature feature. She thought she had covered her tracks. She rushed to a desperate late-night meeting with Dennis and her real lawyer, a corporate defense specialist named Robert. "This man, John," she hissed, slamming the deed copy onto the table. "He has the original grant. It's legitimate. How did this happen?" Dennis, the surveyor, was sweating. "Ma'am, the old boundary markers were covered. We shifted the line by about 47 acres, but we figured the old deed was dead history. Who keeps a deed from the 30s? Robert, the lawyer, was much calmer. He looked at the paperwork, and then he looked at Miss Thorne with a cold, calculating gaze. "The original deed is a problem, but there's a loophole." He leaned in close. "We haven't lost the war yet. Mr. John here is just an inheritor. He's not a developer. We have something he doesn't, the doctrine of adverse possession. This doctrine basically says, if someone uses land openly and continuously for a long period, even if they don't legally own it, they can potentially claim ownership. The key is continuous use." "How do we prove continuous use? We've only been building for 8 months, Ms. Thorne demanded. Robert smiled a small, dark smile. "No, we haven't, but Ms. Thorne, you own a lot of surrounding acreage, correct? We just need to make John's life living hell and claim he abandoned the land long ago. We stop dealing with John's lawyer. We start dealing with John himself. We need to hit him with so many petty, distracting, costly nuisances that he either gets overwhelmed and folds, or he gives us the 18 months we need to file a plausible adverse possession claim, claiming we've been maintaining the abandoned boundaries." Miss Thorne's rage turned into a nasty grin. "So we don't sue him for trespassing. We sue him for what exactly?" Robert's eyes gleamed. "We fine him, we use the HOA rules, we claim his inherited property is an unmaintained nuisance to the community. We'll fine him for every weed, every speck of dust, and every broken window on that old cabin. We bury him in bureaucracy until he begs us to take the land." The war goes petty. John thought he had made the first decisive move. He was wrong. 2 days after the official cease and desist was served, John received a massive, printed official document from the Grand Peaks Preserve HOA board. It wasn't a response to his land claim. It was a notice of violation. The violation: failure to maintain architectural integrity and community standards. The attached fines: $5,000 per day for structural dilapidation of the old cabin, $500 per week for unmanaged native grasses, weeds, and a $10,000 fine for failure to submit a mandatory fence replacement plan. They were using the rules of their non-existent community to fine him for his existing cabin on his own land. The monthly bill was already over $150,000. The war had gone petty, personal, and profoundly expensive. Ms. Thorne hadn't panicked. She had declared a homeowners association war. And the next thing they did to John would prove she was willing to break the law, not just bend it to win. All right, buckle up, because this is where Ms. Thorne goes full supervillain. John received that mountain of violation notices, $150,000 in fines for unmanaged native grasses and dilapidated architecture. It was absurd. It was illegal. But it was also a massive legal headache. Every day he spent dealing with those garbage notices was a day he wasn't advancing the core land dispute. But John was calm. He laminated every notice, stamped them, disputed, land claim pending, and filed them away. He knew that the moment he paid even $1 of those fines, he would be acknowledging the HOA's authority over his property. And that he absolutely would not do. He was waiting for Miss Thorne's next inevitable move. She had the construction crew sitting idle, losing money every hour. She couldn't sell the homes. She couldn't finish the roads. Her investors were calling. A desperate HOA president is a dangerous HOA president. The Grand Peaks Wall Miss Thorne's next move was brutal and physical. Using the crew she had idling and clearly paying them off the books, she ordered them to complete a crucial piece of infrastructure. But it wasn't a road or a clubhouse. It was a wall. John's old cabin was set back from the road, accessible only by a long, unpaved gravel drive that technically ran along the very southern edge of his inherited 47 acres. The HOA, with their bogus survey, claimed that Gravel Drive was now a private HOA access road. One morning, John drove out to get coffee and came back an hour later to find a fortress waiting for him. They had erected a massive, ornamental, wrought-iron security gate, the kind with fancy stone pillars and a key code system, right across his gravel driveway. On the stone pillar was a brass plaque that read, "Grand Peaks Preserve, private access only." They had locked him out. They had used their halted construction crew to physically build an immovable barrier on his land and cut off all access to his home. The gate was bolted down with footings set deep in the concrete. John's historian calm finally began to crack. He was stranded 20 feet from his own home, with the only way in being a hike through the woods. The standoff at the gate, John immediately called the non-emergency line for the sheriff. A deputy arrived, looking tired and confused. John presented his original deed, the survey, and the court-ordered cease and desist for all construction. "See, deputy," John explained, pointing at the stone pillar. "This is a new structure, it's construction. And they put it across my property access." The deputy sighed, looking at the towering gate and then across the massive, empty construction site. "Look, Mr. John, I see your paperwork, and it's solid. But this gate, Ms. Thorne is claiming this is a necessary boundary marker and a temporary security measure to protect the construction equipment from vandalism while the legal issues are sorted out. She says your access road is on their survey, and she's got a lawyer arguing the adverse possession rule, claiming you abandoned this area years ago." It was the bureaucratic nightmare John had feared. The sheriff couldn't touch the gate without a new, specific court order because the HOA was spinning the action as security and not construction. The deputy handed John a card. "You need a specific civil injunction to remove a structure like this. It's not a criminal matter yet unless they physically attack you. Sorry, but this is a game of lawyers now." John was officially locked out of his own house by a ruthless HOA president who had just weaponized a security gate. The quiet fury that night, John spent his time on a neighbor's couch, staring at the satellite maps on his laptop. He realized this wasn't about land anymore. It was about power, control, and fear. Miss Thorne knew the deed was real, but she was gambling on the legal system being too slow, too complicated, and too expensive for a quiet historian to fight. He realized he needed something far more devastating than just the old deed. He needed undeniable, modern proof that Miss Thorne knew the lines were fake, knew the lawyer was corrupt, and that she was actively committing fraud. He needed to find the fake survey. Miss Thorne's lawyer, Robert, had built their entire $50 million project on a new, officially filed plat map that completely ignored John's boundary lines. That map had to have a source, a fake survey commissioned from a dirtbag surveyor. John knew he couldn't sneak into the HOA office or the developer's HQ, but he knew exactly where to look for paper trails, the county records office. They were public documents, and John, the historian, knew those records better than anyone. He drove to the county seat the next morning. While Miss Thorne was gloating over the new gate, John was diving deep into the public records, cross-referencing zoning applications, building permits, and the environmental impact reports filed by the Elevation Group. He was looking for one thing, the name of the original surveyor Miss Thorne used. And after 10 hours surrounded by paper, he found it, Dennis Farrow, Land Surveyors, the same name Robert the lawyer mentioned in their secret meeting. And next to Dennis Farrow's name, on the original, legitimate permit application for the sewer lines, John found a line item that stopped his heart. A boundary adjustment fee paid to Faro, but listed on the developer's ledger under a bizarre, coded expense. Willow Creek alignment bonus. That was the smoking gun. Willow Creek was the public creek Ms. Thorne desperately wanted to include in her private nature preserve. That bonus wasn't for surveying. It was the bribe to move the property line and claim the creek, which forced the entire subdivision onto John's land. But here's where things got really strange. John wasn't just looking at the fake survey. He was looking at something even more explosive, a completely separate, secret set of bank transfers from Ms. Thorne's personal account to the developer's lobbyist, detailing a regular consulting fee. This wasn't just land fraud. This was self-dealing. Ms. Thorne was paying herself handsomely to rubber stamp the project. He was no longer just fighting for his land. He was about to expose a massive, multi-million-dollar corporate conspiracy. John was locked out of his house. The gate was towering, the fines were mounting, and the sheriff told him to hire a lawyer. But John had something more powerful than a lawyer's retainer fee, paper proof of massive fraud. He knew that going to court with his evidence would take months, maybe years, and Ms. Thorne would use every stall tactic in the book. He needed immediate public pressure that would force the county and her investors to take action now. He had to get the gate down, and he had to expose the corruption to the people who mattered most, the 96 unsuspecting future homeowners. The irresistible spectacle. John looked at the massive, empty construction site. The houses were beautiful, practically finished, waiting for people to move in. He saw an opportunity for a display that was undeniable, impossible to ignore, and utterly humiliating for Ms. Thorne. He drove to the nearest print shop. He didn't order a banner. He ordered 47 giant signs, each one 4 feet tall, printed in bold, unmistakable red and black. The message was simple: warning, this home is built on stolen land. See deed reference, 1932, Ledger 8, page 14. This property belongs to John M. Alden. Your HOA president is committing fraud. Then John did the unexpected. Since the construction was halted and the main gate was the only controlled access point, John legally and very visibly entered his property through the unguarded backside perimeter. Over the next 2 nights, operating under the cloak of darkness and using a pickup truck he borrowed, John staked those 47 signs. He didn't put them on the road. He put one directly on the front lawn of every other partially completed house. The Grand Peaks Preserve, which was supposed to be a pristine vision of luxury, woke up to a horror show. Every beautiful new home was branded with a scarlet letter, a giant, public declaration of fraud. The Grand Peaks meltdown. The reaction was instantaneous chaos. Future homeowners who had put down deposits were showing up, furious, demanding answers. The developers' sales agents were scrambling to take the signs down, but as fast as they removed them, John, using a video camera to meticulously document his actions, would put them back up. He was entirely on his own land, making a free speech declaration. The county planning commissioner, the investors, and crucially the local news crew showed up. John, dressed simply and speaking calmly, stood by the gate he couldn't pass, holding up his original 1932 deed copy for the cameras. "I have the proof," he told the reporter. "Ms. Thorne is protecting a criminal land grab. She shut me out of my house to hide the fact that she has sold 96 fraudulent deeds to innocent people." The pressure became unbearable for Ms. Thorne. Her phone didn't stop ringing. The news coverage was brutal. The local affiliate ran with the headline, "HOA home scam, $50 million project built on century-old deed." She knew she had to take immediate, definitive action to spin the narrative, or the whole project would collapse and her investors would turn on her. The board meeting bribed Ms. Thorne called an emergency HOA board meeting. This wasn't a public meeting. It was a desperate strategy session. John, however, knew his rights. Even if the HOA was fraudulent, their meetings were governed by state law. He sent his lawyer, whom he'd hired specifically for the court-level paperwork, to deliver a notice. John Alden, the rightful landowner, demands to attend this meeting to address the legal and financial implications of the current crisis. Ms. Thorne was livid, but her lawyer, Robert, advised against refusing him. "Let him come," Robert sneered. "We'll box him in. We'll show the board that this is just a nuisance lawsuit from a disgruntled man, and we'll vote to push for the adverse possession claim and keep the gate." So John walked into the sterile, expensive conference room where the 3-person HOA board sat. Ms. Thorne, the treasurer, a nervous, retired businessman named Greg, and the secretary, a quiet woman named Carol who looked deeply uncomfortable. Ms. Thorne started the meeting with a cold lie. "Mr. Alden's claim is without merit. This is a frivolous attempt to extort money. We have a solid legal path, adverse possession, to finalize the boundary." John calmly stood up and placed 2 stacks of papers on the table. The first stack was a copy of the 1932 original deed, notarized and confirmed by the county recorder. The second stack was the fraudulent payment records, the Willow Creek alignment bonus paid to the surveyor Dennis Farrow, proving the crime. "Ms. Thorne," John said, his voice quiet but echoing in the room, "the legal fee for Willow Creek alignment bonus is a $75,000 bribe to redraw the property line. That's fraud." The treasurer, Greg, paled and picked up the document. "What is this, Thorne? This isn't on the official budget." Ms. Thorne turned on John, her face a mask of hate. "This is libel. He's lying." "Am I?" John asked, picking up a third, thin stack of paper, the bank records showing the consulting fees she was paying herself. "Or is this also a lie? These transfers from the developer to your personal account for consulting, that self-dealing and theft from the HOA, Ms. Thorne." The room went silent. The treasurer gasped. The secretary, Carol, pushed her chair back. John had exposed the entire, multi-layered conspiracy in one move. But here's where things got really strained. Ms. Thorne didn't deny it. She leaned forward, a chilling smile on her face. "Mr. Alden, that gate is a temporary inconvenience. This land dispute, it will take years, but the money, that can be settled tonight." She looked at the board, then back at John. "Let's make a real deal. We give you $5 million cash right now for a quitclaim deed on the land. No more fraud exposed. No more lawsuits. You get rich, we save the development. Take the money, John. It's more than this dirt is worth." John had the evidence to put her in jail and bankrupt a $50 million project. But she was offering him a massive cash bribe, right in front of witnesses, trying to make the problem go away before the news could sink its teeth in. "All right, HOA Army, welcome back for part 5 of this absolutely wild ride. The HOA built 96 luxury homes on my secret land deed." In part 4, John, locked out of his own home, used 47 giant stolen land signs to publicly expose Ms. Thorne's fraud, drawing in the media and the county. At a tense emergency HOA board meeting, John laid out all his evidence, the fake survey bribe and Ms. Thorne's personal self-dealing. Cornered, Ms. Thorne didn't deny it. Instead, she offered John a $5 million cash bribe for a quitclaim deed, right there in the room, hoping to buy his silence and save her empire. Now John has to make his move. The air in that sterile boardroom was thick with tension. Ms. Thorne, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of desperation and menace, had just laid a $5 million cash bribe on the table. $5 million, to a quiet historian, that was life-changing money. It could make all the problems, all the stress, all the legal battles just disappear. The other 2 board members, Greg the treasurer and Carol the secretary, sat frozen, wide-eyed. They were witnesses to a felony unfolding in real time. John looked at the woman who had locked him out of his home, who had tried to bury him in fines, and who was now trying to buy his silence. He thought about Alara, his gray-tant, and the quiet dignity of her untouched land. He thought about the 96 families who were about to lose their life savings. He knew what he had to do. The recorded rejection, John reached into his jacket pocket. He didn't pull out a pen to sign anything. He pulled out his phone. "Ms. Thorne," he said, his voice calm, clear, and projected, "I appreciate your offer, but everything discussed here tonight, including your generous proposal of $5 million for a quitclaim deed, has been fully recorded." He held up his phone, which had been discreetly recording the entire meeting, a small red light blinking. State law allowed one-party consent recording, and John, the meticulous historian, had been ready. Ms. Thorne's face, already pale, went ashen. The blood drained from it instantly. The treasurer, Greg, let out a small, strangled cough. Carol, the secretary, visibly flinched. "This meeting," John continued, "is also being monitored by my legal counsel, who has a copy of all the evidence presented here tonight, and is prepared to file a class-action lawsuit on behalf of the 96 defrauded homeowners, and a criminal complaint with the district attorney's office for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted bribery." He paused, letting his words sink in. "My land is not for sale, Ms. Thorne, and neither is my silence." He then calmly picked up his evidence, nodded to the stunned board members, and walked out, leaving Ms. Thorne utterly exposed and speechless in her own boardroom. Ms. Thorne's desperate game. Ms. Thorne knew she was finished. The recording, the evidence, the looming class-action lawsuit, the criminal charges, it was all closing in. Her lawyer, Robert, received John's formal rejection and the notification of the recorded bribe attempt. He immediately informed Ms. Thorne that his firm would have to withdraw as her counsel due to ethical conflicts. Abandoned by her lawyer, betrayed by her own greed, Ms. Thorne plunged into a desperate, frantic game of damage control. She was no longer trying to win. She was trying to minimize the inevitable, trying to save anything she could. Her first move was to try to destroy the evidence. She stormed into the HOA office, demanding all copies of the Willow Creek alignment bonus payments and anything related to her consulting fees. But John had already secured official copies from the county. The paper trail was already public. Then she remembered something Robert, her lawyer, had mentioned in their desperate brainstorming session, the secret clause. When Robert had first seen John's 1932 deed, he had briefly mentioned a remote possibility, a tiny, ancient clause that might exist in some very old Colorado land grants. It was a long shot, a legal ghost story, but for a cornered Miss Thorne, it was her only hope. She raced to the county archives herself, a wild look in her eyes frantically. Sifting through dusty, ancient books looking for anything that could save her. She was looking for a reversionary clause, a nearly forgotten legal mechanism that, in some ultra-rare cases, specified that if the original land grant conditions were not met, for example, if the land wasn't used for farming, or if a specific building wasn't maintained, the ownership could revert to a different party. It was a Hail Mary pass, a desperate gamble on a forgotten legal technicality, hoping John's great-aunt Alara's land grant had some obscure condition that hadn't been met. John's countermove, while Miss Thorne was literally digging through history, John was preparing his final, devastating move. He knew Miss Thorne was desperate. He also knew she had been planning the adverse possession claim, arguing he had abandoned the land. He couldn't let her claim he wasn't using the property. So John, the quiet historian, decided to become a very public, very active landowner. He hired a legitimate, fully licensed, and highly reputable land surveyor. This new surveyor not only reconfirmed John's 1932 deed lines, but also meticulously mapped the entire 47 acres, clearly showing Miss Thorne's illegal gate and the placement of all 96 homes on John's property. Then, John announced his plans. He didn't just want his land back. He wanted to start developing it himself. He filed official plans with the county for a new subdivision on his 47 acres, not a luxury development. Something much more humble, much more John, the Alara Preserve. It was going to be a small, eco-friendly community with walking trails and a focus on native plants. This was a genius move. By actively filing for development, John was demonstrating beyond any doubt that he was not abandoning the land. He was publicly asserting his ownership and his intention to use the property. It completely torpedoed Miss Thorne's adverse possession defense. And the irony? His proposed subdivision's roads and infrastructure plans completely cut off access to 40 of Miss Thorne's Grand Peaks Preserve homes, trapping them behind his proposed new development. Miss Thorne, exhausted and defeated, finally found a small, dusty paragraph in a forgotten 1910 county plat map that vaguely hinted at a public access easement that might have cut through John's land. It was weak, it was old, and it was barely applicable. But she clutched it like a lifeline. She was going to court, hoping this obscure, secret clause could somehow save her. But John had already set the stage for total victory. He had the recordings, the fraudulent payments, the self-dealing evidence, the new surveys, and his own very real development plans. The showdown was set. The courtroom was packed. Every single seat was taken by a nervous, dressed-up homeowner from the Grand Peaks Preserve, some holding their deposit contracts, others holding their kids. The air crackled with a mix of dread and furious curiosity. Miss Thorne was there, too, seated at the defense table next to a new, terrified public defender. She looked like a ghost, her usual sharp suit looking baggy, her iron confidence completely shattered. John sat calmly at the plaintiff's table. He wasn't there for revenge. He was there for justice, armed with a briefcase full of undeniable facts. The instant knockout the judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Reynolds, hammered her gavel. The court will hear the plaintiff's motion for an emergency injunction and declaratory judgment of ownership first. John's lead attorney, a sharp, elderly woman John had wisely hired specifically for courtroom demolition, stood up. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. Your Honor, the defense argues that John Alden's claim is based on an old, disputed deed. We are here to show the court that this dispute is, and always has been, based on criminal fraud orchestrated by the defendant, Miss Thorne. The lawyer walked to an easel and placed the first exhibit, a massive, professionally rendered aerial satellite map of the entire Grand Peaks Preserve. The map was color-coded. The blue line showed the official, legitimate, recorded boundary based on John's 1932 deed. The red line showed the fake boundary the HOA had been building on. But the knockout punch wasn't the lines themselves. It was the crucial detail John had uncovered. Your Honor, 96 homes were built on the plaintiff's land. However, the true line, the blue line, was moved by the defendant to illegally acquire two things: the public Willow Creek for a private nature feature, and the main municipal sewer line access point. She pointed to a small, labeled circle on the map. The fake boundary line was moved precisely 47 acres west to capture the sewage access. The developer Elevation Group saved over $2 million in infrastructure costs by fraudulently connecting to that pre-existing public line on Mr. Alden's land. She paused, looking directly at Ms. Thorne. This wasn't a surveying mistake, Your Honor. This was a $2 million infrastructure theft and criminal trespass. The defense is not arguing a simple boundary dispute. They are arguing that a criminal act of infrastructure fraud is legally defensible. The argument wasn't about the old deed anymore. It was about stolen public infrastructure. The judge's face hardened. She looked at the public defender, who could only offer a shrug. The secret clause crumbles Ms. Thorne's last-ditch defense. The secret clause she desperately unearthed was her only weapon left. Her lawyer stood up, shaky and nervous, and stammered out the argument about the ancient, obscure public access easement. John's lawyer simply played the recording from the HOA board meeting. The courtroom fell silent as Ms. Thorne's voice, recorded clearly, offered John $5 million in cash to make the problem go away and save the project. Your Honor, John's lawyer said, an offer of $5 million to silence the true property owner is not the action of someone with a legitimate legal defense. It is an admission of guilt and proof of desperation to cover up a criminal enterprise. The homeowners in the gallery began murmuring, then shouting. This was the first time most of them had heard about the bribe. The bailiffs had to restore order. The judge had heard enough. She didn't even need to call witnesses. The evidence was insurmountable. The deed was legitimate, the fraudulent intent was proven by the bribe and the fake survey payment, and the HOA's claim of adverse possession was destroyed by John's active development plan. The judgment Judge Reynolds took a deep breath, looking out over the stunned homeowners. The court finds that the plaintiff, John Alden, holds clear, legitimate, and superior title to the 47 acres known as the Grand Peaks Preserve subdivision. The court further finds that the defendants, the Grand Peaks Preserve HOA board, led by Ms. Thorne, and the Elevation Group, engaged in acts of intentional and willful trespass and fraud. She hammered the gavel, making the final declarations. Declaratory judgment. The court recognizes John Alden as the sole legal owner of the 47 acres, including all 96 residential lots and the improvements thereon. Injunction. The court grants an immediate injunction against Ms. Thorne and the HOA, removing the gate and granting John Alden full, unrestricted access to his property. Forfeiture due to the intentional fraud. All improvements, meaning the 96 homes, are deemed fixtures on the land and are forfeited to the rightful landowner, John Alden. The entire courtroom erupted. The 96 homeowners gasped in unison. Their homes, their mortgages, their down payments, all were legally John's now. Ms. Thorne just collapsed into her chair, silent. It wasn't just the land. It was the realization that she was facing massive criminal charges and the utter collapse of her life. John, however, did not celebrate. He looked at the horrified faces of the homeowners. He didn't want their houses, he wanted his land back, and he wanted justice for the fraud. But here, as where things got really strange, the judge still had one thing left to address, the financial restitution. She wasn't done punishing the HOA. And finally, the court finds the defendants jointly and severally liable for damages. The court hereby awards the plaintiff the sum of $30 million in punitive and compensatory damages from the HOA and the developer, payable immediately. $30 million. That was the punchline. John had just won the land, all the homes, and a massive cash judgment. The revenge was complete. But how exactly do you collect a $30 million verdict from an empty HOA account and a bankrupt developer? The court had emptied, but the drama was far from over. John sat in the conference room with his attorney, the heavy silence broken only by the scratch of a pen on paper. Outside, chaos reigned as the 96 homeowners tried to process the fact that they legally owned nothing. John owned their homes. John owned their roads. John owned their $30 million. John, his lawyer said, stacking the judgment papers, you are now one of the wealthiest men in this county. Ms. Thorne is facing multiple fraud charges and the developer is bankrupt. We have the legal right to evict those 96 people tomorrow and seize their assets to satisfy the judgment. John, the historian, closed his eyes. He wasn't a corporate predator. He was a man who cared about truth and land rights. He wasn't trying to punish the victims of Ms. Thorne's greed. He was trying to stop the greed itself. He looked at his lawyer and outlined his final, incredible plan. The Grand Peaks truce. John's first move was to execute the judgment against the HOA and the developer, not the individual homeowners. He immediately seized every asset belonging to the Grand Peaks Preserve HOA, their bank accounts, their corporate vehicles, and every last piece of heavy construction equipment sitting idle on his land. It was a spectacular sweep that paid down a fraction of the $30 million judgment, but it effectively dissolved Ms. Thorne's fraudulent organization overnight. Next, John did the unimaginable. He called a town hall meeting with the 96 terrified homeowners. The meeting was tense. People were crying, demanding to know if he was going to auction their houses. John stood before them, not as an adversary, but as the new landlord. "I am not here to profit from your loss," John stated, his voice ringing with conviction. "You are victims of the same criminal fraud as I am. You put your faith and your money in a corrupt organization. I am the rightful owner of this land and these homes, but I will not evict you." He then unveiled his Grand Peaks truce. The deal. John offered to sell the land and the homes back to the current homeowners for the exact price the land was worth before construction started. This wiped out the massive, inflated price tag they had paid to the fraudulent developer. The forgiveness. He announced that all of the outstanding, fraudulent HOA fines against his cabin, now a total of over $2 million, were null and void, and he would forgive any personal debt those homeowners owed the now-dissolved HOA. The catch and the justice. The homeowners had to agree to join John's new community, the Alara Preserve. They would pay John a modest, temporary land lease for the next 2 years, allowing him to secure proper rezoning and transfer the land legally. This arrangement would compensate him for the land's original value without bleeding the homeowners dry. The homeowners realized they weren't being ruined. They were being saved. They would get to keep their houses, and they would own them based on a fair, uninflated value. John's deal essentially forced them to take a financial hit on the stolen land's original value, but it prevented them from losing their homes and their entire down payments. The final word on Ms. Thorne, while John was busy brokering peace and rebuilding his life, Ms. Thorne's legal nightmare was just beginning. The recorded bribe and the evidence of the $2 million infrastructure fraud were all the district attorney needed. The last image of Ms. Thorne in the local paper wasn't of her driving her Mercedes. It was of her being escorted into a government building in handcuffs. She faced decades in prison for fraud, theft, and conspiracy. The last of the $30 million punitive judgment was levied against Ms. Thorne's personal assets and those of the few remaining culpable directors, ensuring that every cent of her ill-gotten gains was seized and forfeited. The historian's new home in the end, John didn't keep the millions from the verdict. The bulk of it was used to secure the land legally, cover his monumental legal fees, and establish the Alara Preserve Trust for future community maintenance. He was comfortable, but he wasn't filthy rich. The HOA gate that had locked him out was finally torn down by a legitimate construction crew on John's orders, and in its place, John installed a modest wooden sign, "Welcome to the Alara Preserve." John finally had his land back, exactly the way he wanted it, a quiet, respectful community with no HOA president to fear. He retired the 1932 ledger with the original deed and finally got to start the peaceful life his great-aunt intended. He won the war, saved the victims, and brought down a multi-million-dollar corrupt enterprise, all because he decided to wait and watch, armed with a piece of paper. But here's the final, strange part of the story. The new homeowners, now part of the Alara Preserve, realized that they still needed some form of governance for the shared roads and services. They voted to create a simple, non-mandatory community group. And who did they unanimously elect as their first and most trusted community director? John. The quiet historian who had destroyed one HOA system was now in charge of building a new, fair one. And sometimes, late at night, when the Colorado wind whistles through the quiet streets, John swears he can hear the faint, distant grinding of bulldozers, a reminder that in the world of HOAs and property, you can never fully relax.